It's too hot to be faithful. Can we agree that after a certain temperature, you should just fuck whoever lives closest to your job? And your significant other just has to understand. I'm finna sit in this heat commuting all the way to the house? No. I'm staying with Beverly. She lives around the corner from the job. And I will call you when it's under 60 degrees again. And we can be a family.
Good morning. It's Tuesday, Trump Tuesday, June the 18th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host from Southern California, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have the patriotic shorts, motivation, Bishop Barron, Ayn Rand, the 33 strategies of war, and Donald Trump. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. And now, Stuart Varney with the headlines.
Cheryl, good morning, everyone. The official announcement comes today, a massive new amnesty program for illegals living here 10 years and married to a U.S. citizen. Work visas will also be speeded up for illegals who have college degrees. After the announcement, the president heads to Virginia for a campaign event, then to the beach house for debate prep. Trump goes to Wisconsin, considered a must-win state. Earlier this week, Trump reportedly called Milwaukee a horrible city. His campaign walked it back a little, saying Trump was referring to crime and voter fraud. The Republicans hold their convention there next month. To the markets, and the rally continues, especially in the tech-heavy NASDAQ. It's up about 11 points at the moment. Retail sales up only 0.1% in May, and sales in earlier months were revised down. The Dow off 20, S&P down 2, NASDAQ up 7 points. Interest rates, that's where you see the effect of retail sales. They're heading lower. The 10-year is now right at 4.25%. And the 2-year, that's coming in this morning at 4.72%, below 4.75%. Bitcoin, losing steam. You're looking at $65,000 a coin. Oil, right around $80 a barrel, 80.41. Gas, no change, 3.44 for regular. Diesel down 1 cent at 3.77. All right, politics. The fight over the president's cognitive abilities is not over. Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre says the tapes of Biden's difficulties are cheap fakes and manipulation. We will contest that. You will see the whole tape. No editing, no manipulation. There is a what-if debate. What if Biden makes a disastrous gaffe in the first debate? How to get him to step aside and who to replace him with. The Democrats need a plan B. On the show today, the Senate is drafting legislation that requires young women, along with young men, to register for the draft. Women have been serving at all levels of the military since 2013. Tuesday, June 18th, 2024. Varney and Company is about to begin.
And that was Stuart Varney with the headline. So if I was an illegal alien and I'm thinking I'm going to get amnesty, I'd think twice, because when Donald Trump gets into office, he's going to cancel that program and he's going to deport all illegal aliens. So back in a minute. Thank you. Now, Stuart Varney's My Take.
9 days from now, President Biden faces off against Donald Trump in the first presidential debate. What if Biden has one of those very senior moments where it's clear he can't do the job? Now, I understand this is pure speculation, but the president has not been doing well recently, and a major slip would be a disaster for his campaign. The Democrats need a plan B just in case. First thing, if there is a Biden disaster, is to figure out how to get him to step aside. The top leaders of the party could pay him a call and make it clear that he's got to go. First Lady Jill Biden, Senate Leader Chuck Schumer, former Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Barack Obama, they could see the writing on the wall. His age is showing badly, and voters are taking notice. You gotta go. Just like senior Republicans paid a call to President Nixon during Watergate. You gotta go. He won't leave easily. He spent his life in politics, and now he's achieved the big prize, the Oval Office. If he refuses to leave, the next thing would be the convention. Party leaders could use Chicago to upset the delegate count. Can you imagine? A sitting president unseated at his own convention? That wouldn't play well on election day, now would it? You can tell things are spiraling out of control. There is a suggestion to leave Biden at the top of the ticket, but replace Kamala Harris with Hillary Clinton. Would that reassure the nation if we knew Hillary could get into the Oval Office? And how do you get Kamala out? Perhaps we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. Biden has some things going for him in the debate. The mics can be muted, so Trump can't steamroller the president as he did in 2020. Both candidates will be standing in one place, so there's no awkward movement around the set. And CNN is moderating. It's good to have a friend calling the questions. But one thing favors Trump. Neither candidate will be allowed to have written notes, just a pad and a pen. That takes away Biden's security blanket. There's no one to write his answers. It says something, though, doesn't it, that the president's cognitive difficulties have gone so far that there is speculation that he won't make it past the first debate. Second hour of Varney just getting started.
So with this, if you're going to vote, I understand loyalty to party, right? You're a Democrat, maybe you've been a lifelong Democrat, and you want to vote Democrat. Okay, I get it. But Biden, no. If you have to vote Democrat, vote for Kennedy. You have another option. Everybody keeps talking about, well, who are they going to replace him with? They have a replacement waiting for him, waiting right in the wings, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. So again, if you want to vote Democrat, vote Kennedy. If you can't be bothered to do it for the sake of the country, do it for the sake of your party. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, the Patriotic Shorts.
We pushed pretty deep into the city, deeper than the insurgents thought we would go. So we hardpoint the candy store. The sun comes up that morning, and we actually start observing the insurgents sort of casually walking up to what they believe is the front line, but we're well past that front line. And pretty effectively for the first couple hours that morning, we engage them. We start killing them and surprising them. But it doesn't take long before they sort of figure out where we are, and slowly they start enveloping us in the candy store. Additionally, the resistance from across Highway 10 is pretty intense for the company. So the assault that was supposed to go first thing in the morning gets continually stalled into the afternoon. And then our platoon by that afternoon, we start taking casualties.
She was still recovering from surgery and drifting in and out of consciousness, her husband Harry gently holding her hand. Her name was Mamie Creamer, and though mired with her own health issues, her thoughts never strayed far from her son James. Just a year earlier, in 1943, they had been celebrating James's 18th birthday at home in Baltimore, and now he was in faraway Guam, a private first class with the Army's 77th Infantry. They wrote each other every week, James never failing to tell Mom the latest. As the anesthetic fog lifted from Mamie in her hospital room, she jolted herself upright. "Doc James!" she screamed out at nobody in particular before collapsing back into her bed. Several weeks later, a letter came from James. "Mom, the strangest thing has happened. Our unit was on high alert for a nighttime attack when I heard a woman's voice piercing through the silence of the jungle. At the sound of it, I ducked, just as a bullet whizzed past my head. What luck. Maybe that wasn't luck, James."
How does the United States deal with pirates that mess around? These Iranian-backed extremists had a choice. Leave the area or learn firsthand the meaning of the U.S. Navy's unofficial motto, Semper Fortis. Just a day after the USS Laboon and USS Gravely intercepted 2 anti-ship ballistic missiles aimed at the Maersk Hangzhou, the ship sent out another distress call, this time under attack by 4 speedboats. The attackers fired small arms and rockets trying to board the ship, but the ship's contract security team returned fire, holding off the pirates until help arrived. The pirates' bad luck doubled when the USS Eisenhower aircraft carrier happened to be nearby. Responding swiftly to the distress call, 2 Seahawk helicopters launched immediately, swooping in and delivering a clear message to the boats: clear out or face the consequences. The pirates, clearly not the sharpest tools in the shed, decided to fire at the Seahawks. You can bet the U.S. Navy helicopter crews smirked as they returned fire, sinking 3 of the 4 boats and neutralizing the swimmers. The 4th boat? It either fled or was spared to spread the word about how they found out the meaning of Semper Fortis.
Did you know in the film Operation Petticoat, the film features a humorous scene where a truck is sunk, which was actually inspired by a real-life incident that occurred during World War II. On August 9th, 1944, the USS Bulfin was on patrol and followed 4 Japanese ships into Minami-Daito Harbor. The submarine's crew launched 6 bow torpedoes aimed at the moored Japanese ships. 3 of these torpedoes successfully hit their targets, resulting in the sinking of 2 Japanese vessels. However, 1 torpedo veered off course and struck a pier instead. This unexpected impact caused an explosion that blew up a bus parked on the pier, subsequently throwing it into the water.
What happened, sir? We sunk a truck.
I got all tangled up my chute, and all of a sudden I see 2 guys coming on bicycles toward me, and it didn't dawn on me what they were going to do, and they jumped out and had knives. Then I suddenly realized these are Dutch underground, and they cut me out of my chute and everything and jacked me up on my feet and said, "Go get him, soldier." And I just says, "Thanks a lot," you know. And then I could see tanks, German tanks, way over there in the distance circling around. They were apparently killing guys that had dropped. They were circling around. That was some distance away. Fortunately, I was in a safer area, and I all by myself.
And that was the Patriotic Shorts. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, little motivation.
A lot of us have big dreams, big goals. And when you have goals that are maybe outside your reach, you have to know that getting to that goal, you're going to have a lot of bad days, a lot of setbacks. Failure is going to happen. So how fast do you get up from that? But the biggest key to success in anything you do is you got to have an unlimited supply of fire, this drive and passion that I'm going to be somebody. It has to be there because on all those bad days and all those days you don't want to do stuff, you have to be your own motivator, your own coach, your own trainer, your own everything. You have to come into work ready to go. You may have failed miserably yesterday. People are like, "Man, you just lost everything. How the hell are you to stay motivated?" Because this is what it takes. This is what it takes.
When you decide acting in your best interest, you're going to lose some friends. Everybody's not going to approve of you. There's some people that won't like you. Who do you think you are? You are arrogant. What do you think you can do? You think you can get away with that? You're selfish. Get away from these people that's in your life that ain't doing nothing. Get away from people in your life that's hating. Get away from them. Get away from them. You ever heard said one spoiled apple will spoil a whole barrel? One negative person can spoil your whole life. Leave the flakes alone. People that are seriously not serious.
Don't ever let somebody tell you you can't do something. If you have a dream, you have to protect it. When people can't do something themselves, they want to tell you you can't do it. Don't let these negative people turn you away from what you want. Just stay focused on where you want to go.
If you can just keep hope alive, you can make it. Because if you keep hoping, it is really faith. You just got to transpose it into I hope this happened to I believe this can happen. See, a lot of people have an idea or a dream and they give up on it. No, don't do that. Work your dream until it gets hard. Most things don't happen as soon as we think they should happen. Any number of things can happen to interrupt your flow. It's okay. Don't take it personal. Just acknowledge what's going on. It's called life and keep on working on your dream because this is your life. This is what you love. This is your passion. And feel within yourself that everything is going to work out for you. But you must be patient, persistent, and positive, no matter what. When you grinding hurts. Grinding is a sacrifice. Grinding costs. When you're grinding and your body tell you hurt, you stop. When you hurt, you stop. When you feel pain, you stop. When you tired, you stop. When you disappointed, you stop. When somebody get in your ear, you stop. Some of you abuse until it's uncomfortable. You abuse when everything is going right, but sometimes stuff start happening where it's uncomfortable. You start to break, you start to bend, you start to fold. It ain't always gonna be the way you like it. The conditions ain't always gonna be perfect. But if you want this, if you really want this, you gotta learn to sacrifice. You gotta learn to give up and go up. Because skill can't get you past certain things. Agility can't get you. You gotta have mental toughness. Now, whatever goal you have, you're gonna have some difficulties. You're gonna have some challenges. Long journey, long dark night. But when you hold on to your dream, don't let anybody kill it in you. When it doesn't make sense to anybody, including you sometimes, just hold on. Once you give yourself an opportunity to try and to stretch, you'll find out you can do more than you can ever begin to imagine. And if you quit, if you falter, if you stop, all the pain will be for nothing. You don't quit on me. You man up. You woman up. You get your life back. I need mental toughness. Be persistent. I mean, get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, even when you don't see results. You made a commitment to get up at 3, so you get up at 3. You do as many reps as you said you were going to do. You got to get to a point where you are locked into the process. So every day you do it on Monday. You come back and do it Tuesday. You come back and do it Wednesday. You come back and do it Thursday. You come back and do it Friday. You are persistent. You fall, you get right back up. Don't stop for a week. Don't stop for a month. Don't stop for a year. You fail a class, you go right back and take it again. Don't stop. Don't quit. Don't give up. Why? Muscle memory. And you do it over and over and over. Every time you get better and better and better. And repetition deepens the impression in your mind. Those motor skills, you start implanting that thing. You do it over and over and over and over and over again. You start implanting stuff and then boom, memory kicks in. And you come up against that thing. You gotta outdo that thing. And you can't do it when you get there. You gotta already make up your mind before you get to that exam and pass that exam. You gotta make up in your mind when you talk to that signal. You gotta look at it before you even get to it. So don't you ever give up. As long as you got breath in your nostrils, don't you ever give up. Don't you ever give in, because I never told you it would be easy. But with mental toughness, you can get it done. Download this video.
And that was a little bit of motivation. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, the Daily Dad for June the 18th.
June 18th. All that matters is this. Flea, one of the greatest musicians of all time, was a lifelong dabbler in drugs and alcohol. Unlike his Red Hot Chili Pepper bandmates, Flea never got fully strung out. Drugs never blew up his life or turned him into a zombie. He knew it wasn't healthy, but he told himself he was managing the habit successfully, never taking drugs around his kids or blowing opportunities because of them. So why did he suddenly get sober? He explained it in an interview with the comedian and podcaster Mark Maron. I remember having a talk with someone once about being a dad, he said, and my daughter was about 4 years old or something, and I would get high when I was away from her. Oh, I don't do it when I'm around her, I said. And they said, all that matters as a parent is to be present for your kid and be communicative. And you have to be communicating with them when you're not around them. You have to be. It's like being in a state where you're always there for them. Like your spirit is always available whenever they need you, Flea explained. And that really resonated with me. And I love my kids so much, and I was like, that's it. I got to be there. Presence, being there. This is the key to parenting. And what are drugs and addiction and unaddressed issues in our lives but means of not being there? Which is why we have to sober up and deal with our demons. Because even if they don't feel like they're actively manifesting themselves at home, they are. They are taking us away from our kids. They are putting us in positions to not be there for them when they need us. And they will need us. And that kind of self-inflicted disconnection is unacceptable.
And that was The Daily Dad by Ryan Holiday for June the 18th. Back in a minute. Thank you now, Bishop Robert Barron.
There is no guru, teacher, founder, nobody who's as strange and relentless as Jesus. And therefore, the religion attached to Jesus is the strangest of them all. Jesus says, whoever loves father or mother more than me, son or daughter more than me, is not worthy of me. The Buddha would not say this. Muhammad wouldn't say this. Moses wouldn't say this. Confucius wouldn't say this. Aristotle wouldn't say it. Plato wouldn't say it. I don't know anybody in the philosophical or religious tradition who would say such a strange thing. But Jesus says it. Your love for me personally has to go beyond the most intense loves of your life. Now, you see the point I'm making, everybody, and why I speak of the strangeness of Christianity. He wouldn't say this unless he himself in person were the very highest good. That's what's at stake in Christianity.
And that was Bishop Robert Barron. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, the Ayn Rand thought of the day. Quote, capitalism has created the highest standard of living ever known on earth. The evidence is incontrovertible. The contrast between West and East Berlin is the latest demonstration, like a laboratory experiment for all to see. Yet those who are loudest in proclaiming their desire to eliminate poverty are loudest in denouncing capitalism. Man's well-being is not their goal, unquote. And that was the Ayn Rand thought of the day. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the 33 strategies of war.
Reversal. Sometimes outright war is best. When, for example, you can crush your enemies by encirclement. In the ongoing relationships of daily life, though, one-upmanship is usually the wiser strategy. It may sometimes seem therapeutic to outfight your rivals directly. It may sometimes be appealing to send an overtly intimidating message. But the momentary gains you may earn with a direct approach will be offset by the suspicions you arouse in your colleagues, who will worry that someday you will strong-arm them too. In the long run, it is more important to secure good feelings and maintain appearances. Wise courtiers always seem to be paragons of civilized behavior, encasing their iron fist in a velvet glove.
And that was the 33 strategies of war. Back in a minute. Thank you. If you're a Democrat, you should be voting Republican, because the Democrat Party has been on the wrong side of history since the Civil War. Vote Republican. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now the Robert Reich corner from his Instagram post. Typical pay for the 100 highest paid CEOs was over $29 million last year. Much of the compensation was tied to stock gains. Just so happens the corporation spent $800 billion on stock buybacks, which artificially boost share prices. Translation, CEOs are goosing their own pay. Now, you got to ask yourself, because the temptation here is to want to look at and respond to what he's saying or writing in this particular case, rather than asking yourself, what is he doing? And if you do that and you try to respond to what he is saying, you lose. All there is to it. Because the claim is arbitrary. He's making an arbitrary claim and he's trying to be a messenger. He's trying to be transparent. And so if you allow him to be transparent, he wins. If you don't allow him to be transparent, I call it blaming the messenger, because they'll say, don't attack the messenger. Yes, attack the messenger. That's the way to win here. So in this particular case, we can do it either by asking him, why did you allow this to happen? Why did the Democrats allow this to happen? Why did Joe Biden allow this to happen? Because he's saying that this is happening right here, right now. Why is it on the Biden administration's watch? Why are they allowing it to happen? So that's one way to do it. Another way we can do it is just simply mock him and sing, no pay raise for you, no pay raise for you, no pay raise, no pay raise, no pay raise for you. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Chapter 3 of Speechless by Michael Knowles, Cultural Hegemony.
Chapter 3, Cultural Hegemony. In 1848, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels predicted the inevitable triumph of socialist revolution. By 1929, as the Italian Communist Party founder Antonio Gramsci languished in prison, the revolution seemed decidedly inevitable, even to Marx's most fervent disciples. Marx had declared that the oppressed underclasses of Europe would quickly rise up and throw off the shackles of tradition and social order that held them in bondage. But it turned out the poor proles enjoyed their traditions. If the social order enslaved them, the slaves didn't seem to know or care. Marx viewed man as a material rather than a metaphysical or hylomorphic being, and consequently he believed that material conditions define history and politics. The machinery of the Industrial Revolution had formed the oppressed proletariat into a revolutionary force, and the inevitable unfolding of history would compel it to overthrow its oppressors. But while Marx and Engels perceived the historic enormity of industrial exploitation, they failed to recognize a stronger, more pervasive force that inhibited revolution: culture. Karl Marx died a failure in 1883. The revolution had not materialized. But 2 years after Marx's death, the first in a new generation of Marxists was born who would empower Marxism by redirecting its focus from economics to culture. The first of these cultural Marxists was the philosopher, critic, and Hungarian Minister of Culture, Georg Lukács, who was soon eclipsed by the godfather of this new ideological movement, Antonio Gramsci, Marxist philosopher and communist politician. In recent years, leftist activists have attempted to rewrite the history of this pivotal political movement, cultural Marxism, as a conspiracy theory. The most ambitious revisionists have added the implausible charge of anti-Semitism to the smear. Political operatives at the Southern Poverty Law Center launched a censorious campaign based on this canard as early as 2003. Bill Berkowitz, a leftist activist and freelance writer for the SPLC, claimed that the term cultural Marxism was intended to conjure up xenophobic anxieties, in particular against the Jews. In May 2019, leftist activist and Al Jazeera columnist Paul Rosenberg took to the pages of Salon to indict cultural Marxism as the grand unifying narrative for the hard, fascist, and neo-Nazi right, comparing the concept to the protocols of the Elders of Zion, which served to inspire Hitler and his Nazis. The concerted effort to make the phrase cultural Marxism taboo underscores the central strategy of political correctness. Control the words, control the culture. And the strategy worked. By 2019, mainstream information channels accepted the new definition. Wikipedia, the most popular source for general knowledge on the internet, had redefined cultural Marxism as an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory which claims that the Frankfurt School is part of a continual academic and intellectual effort to undermine and destroy Western culture. When one investigates the phrase conspiracy theory, which came into fashion in its present meaning during the late 1960s, one discovers leftists insisting that research into the origins of conspiracy theory itself constitutes a conspiracy theory. In an essay outlining the sudden leftist denial of a well-known intellectual movement, political scientist Paul Kenger reflected on the charge. An anti-Semitic conspiracy theory? He asked. That sounds like the very conspiracy mongering that the anonymous writers are charging as conspiracy mongering. So it was. And the conspiracy mongers didn't intend to let Professor Kenger off the hook just because he had figured out their game. Predictably, an alumnus of Kenger's college mailed a letter to the professor's bosses, assailing him for uttering the forbidden phrase and demanding his dismissal. How can one even blame the author of that letter? He merely parroted the definition offered him by the mainstream media, which in turn parroted leftist activists, who for their part invented the smear out of whole cloth. This very process of cultural transformation exhibits what Gramsci called cultural hegemony, later reformulated by the radical student activist Rudi Dutschke as the long march through the institutions. Leftists now have such sway over the culture that they can spread their lies at a whim. In smearing Kenger, the left proved his point. Radicals seek to silence any mention of cultural Marxism because that well-known intellectual movement undergirds, though it does not fully explain, the phenomenon of political correctness. They justify their censorship of the phrase and their attacks against those who dare utter it as a matter of public safety. The logic goes something like this. A couple of deranged killers once also griped about cultural Marxism, so we must prevent word from getting out about that intellectual movement, which also does not exist. The fearmongers never seem to show the same worry over the radicals who preached Marxism in T-shirts celebrating Che Guevara, who spilt an ocean of blood in its name. In a November 13, 2018 piece in the New York Times, Yale professor Samuel Moyn offered the typical argument that cultural Marxism is a crude slander, referring to something that does not exist, unfortunately does not mean actual people are not being set up to pay the price as scapegoats to appease a rising sense of anger and anxiety. Moyn assailed the concept as inseparable from the most noxious anti-Semitism and a dangerous lure in an increasingly unhinged moment. But just a few paragraphs earlier in the very same piece, Moyn contradicted his own thesis. Some Marxists, like the Italian philosopher Antonio Gramsci and his intellectual heirs, tried to understand how the class rule they criticize worked through cultural domination, he admitted. In other words, cultural Marxism does exist. It has been around since the early 20th century, and its most prominent progenitor was Italian, not Jewish. So much for conspiracy theories and anti-Semitism. Among Mussolini's many sins and blunders, the least acknowledged and most significant may have been the dictator's decision to imprison Antonio Gramsci, not because Gramsci didn't deserve it, but because imprisonment afforded the communist agitator the time and focus to write his influential prison notebooks. For 20 years, we must stop this brain from functioning, explained the prosecutor at Gramsci's trial in 1926. With the hindsight of a century, one understands the prosecutor's fear and sense of urgency. But given the widespread recognition of Gramsci's genius, one fails to understand the fascist regime's decision to permit him a pen and paper in his cell. Rather than stop Gramsci's brain from functioning, Mussolini focused it so that it would resound throughout the ages. Gramsci continues to exert his influence even today, particularly on university campuses and from there throughout the broader culture. A recently deceased founding member and president of the International Gramsci Society was Joseph Buttigieg, an influential professor of English at Notre Dame, whose son Pete sought the Democratic Party nomination for president in 2020. That a putatively moderate presidential candidate could boast so radical an intellectual pedigree highlights the extent to which Gramsci's views have infiltrated the mainstream. In 2011, the elder Buttigieg published the first and only critical edition of Gramsci's prison notebooks translated into English. The journal entries give readers a glimpse into not merely the seeds of political correctness, but also the justification for the denial and deceit practiced in its name, particularly in Gramsci's admiration of Niccolò Machiavelli, the prince of political immorality and founder of modern political science. The name Machiavelli conjures different and contradictory images to different people. He defended principality. He supported republics. He encouraged deceit in public dealing. He demanded honesty about human nature. He was an active participant in the political intrigues of his time. He was a disinterested philosopher communing with the ancients. Many more scholarly books have investigated Machiavelli's true character and aims. For our purposes, it suffices to understand how Gramsci viewed the man, and, through him, the relationship between political philosophy and politics, theory and practice. Gramsci read in Machiavelli a philosophy of praxis, or a neo-humanism, in that he does not recognize either immanent or transcendent elements of the metaphysical kind, but only the concrete action of men who, because of their one historical needs, work on and transform reality. For Gramsci, Machiavelli was no dispassionate political scientist, but a man of action. Gramsci, too, was a man of action, a practicing politician until his imprisonment, but he recognized that the revolution he sought could never take place without cultural upheaval. Gramsci believed that Marxists should aim to attain what he called cultural hegemony, an early expression of Andrew Breitbart's famous dictum that politics is downstream of culture, and the beating heart of culture is language. In the little red Discourse or Dialogue About Our Language, Machiavelli compares the infiltration of an opponent's language with the military tactics used by ancient Rome to control foreign territories and armies. By cultural hegemony, Gramsci understood, as did Machiavelli, that society may be overcome not solely by force, but also by internal subversion. A crafty revolutionary may find more success by transforming a society's traditions, institutions, and most of all its language, than by picking a fight out in the open. According to stereotype, the absent-minded professor can tell you everything about his abstract theories, but he knows nothing of the practical world. Intellectuals, ideologues, and radicals may excite one another with their utopian visions, but their lack of common sense precludes them from persuading common people. No revolution can succeed if it opposes common sense. Therefore, the clever revolutionary must transform the common sense to accord with his vision. So Gramsci undertook to change the common sense by infiltrating the social institutions that shape common sense. He differentiated between wars of maneuver, in which the revolutionaries engage their opponents head-on, and wars of position, in which the aggressors defeat their adversaries by gaining positions of power within the established institutions. The latter strategy has come to be called the long march through the institutions, a phrase ubiquitously attributed to Gramsci in the words of Joseph Buttigieg, but in fact coined by Rudi Dutschke. For revolution to take hold, it does not suffice merely to control the means of production, or even the levers of political power. It requires cultural hegemony, total domination of the prevailing institutions. Together with the problem of gaining political and economic power, explained Gramsci, the proletariat must also face the problem of winning intellectual power. Just as it has thought to organize itself politically and economically, it must also think about organizing itself culturally. Gramsci understood that culture cultivates at both the individual and societal level. Culture is organization, discipline of one's inner self, a coming to terms with one's own personality. It is the attainment of a higher awareness, he wrote. Gramsci desired to create a new higher awareness for the oppressed proletariat because he deplored the awareness with which he found them. Gramsci encountered the same dilemma his disciples face today. No matter how confident they are in the ability of their radical theories to improve the lot of the common man never seems to like those theories. In fact, the common man tends to enjoy his own customs, language, and way of life. This contentment must therefore constitute a false consciousness, that cannot be overcome save by raising awareness, a popular phrase derived from Gramsci. To raise the awareness of the people, to transform the common sense, one must subtly uproot and replant their culture. Every revolution, he writes, has been preceded by an intense labor of criticism, by the diffusion of culture and the spread of ideas amongst the masses of men. Thus, the revolutionary must take up two goals simultaneously: to criticize and to educate. A group of Marxist academics took up the task in the 1920s, first in Germany and later in the United States. Initially called the Institute for Marxism, and later the Institute for Social Research, the group came to be known simply as the Frankfurt School, after the university that lent the scholars institutional credibility. The Frankfurt School developed the social philosophy of critical theory, which over the past century has come to dominate not just college campuses in the United States, but primary and secondary education as well. These educational institutions have offered an incubator to protect and nourish critical theory, even after the fall of the Berlin Wall relegated orthodox Marxists to their own ash heap of history. In the words of Martin Jay, the preeminent and sympathetic historian of the Frankfurt School, the Academy has become virtually the last refuge of critical thinking of the type epitomized by the Frankfurt School, and the opportunities for its practical realization have virtually disappeared. Though Jay derides the alarmist right for its often hysterical campaign against the alleged specter of political correctness, he nonetheless acknowledges critical theory's unexpectedly secure, perhaps ironically even canonical, status as a central theoretical impulse in contemporary academic life. The double meaning of the word critical obscures Jay's assessment of academia. Critical thinking in the sense of objective analysis hardly exists on university campuses today, but the sort of thinking proposed by critical theory dominates. And just what is the theory? Simple: to criticize. The Frankfurt School theorists varied in interest, approach, and even ideology. What united them, according to Max Horkheimer, an influential early director of the Frankfurt School, was the critical approach to existing society. Some modern critics of critical theory portray the Frankfurt School as a monolithic movement with a substantive message. But this analysis fails to give the devils their due. Concrete systems may be criticized, as the critical theorists well knew. The Frankfurt School never left itself open to the sort of attacks it leveled at others. The strength of critical theory came not from any philosophical coherence, but from its position, in Jay's words, as a gadfly on other systems. In an 1843 letter to the German philosopher Arnold Ruge, Marx called for the ruthless criticism of all that exists. Marx wanted to watch the world burn. While the Frankfurt School diverged from Marx in many ways, it remained faithful to this delight in destruction. According to Marx, the bulk of mankind was enslaved by economic circumstance. According to Gramsci and the Frankfurt School, culture was the culprit. But both Marxism and critical theory propose, in the words of Horkheimer, to liberate human beings from the circumstances that enslave them, by which he meant Western civilization, though even that grand target fails to capture the enormity of their goal. The Frankfurt School saw enslavement even beyond the bounds of society, in nature itself, a perception that helps to explain the group's obsession with sex. Critical theory entered the world through the unholy matrimony of Marx and Freud. At its most basic tactical level, the Frankfurt School, especially Erich Fromm, Max Horkheimer, and Herbert Marcuse, sought to reconcile sex and socialism. The Frankfurt School took its cues from Marx, who denied the classical conception of human nature as fixed and permanent. Instead, he considered it to be socially constructed and therefore fluid. The human essence is no abstraction inherent in each single individual, wrote Marx in Theses on Feuerbach. In its reality, it is the ensemble of the social relations. From this understanding of human nature, or rather the lack thereof, Gramsci derived the necessity of cultural hegemony. From Marcuse and other neo-Marxists deduced from it the revolutionary importance of sex. No social relation influences the human essence more than sex, which sits at the center of every creation account. Uranus plows Gaia in the ancient Greek myths. The sacred prostitute Shamhat tames Enkidu's savage lust and civilizes him in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Within the first 3 chapters of Genesis, Eve tempts Adam, he succumbs, and God banishes mankind from paradise. If social relations hold the key to transforming the human essence, sex holds the key to human relations. Sex also plays a role in the construction and destruction of society's fundamental institution, the family. Culture-minded Marxists have long understood that any successful march through the institutions must overcome the family. Among the most imaginative and memorable of these deviants was Wilhelm Reich, an Austrian communist and disciple of Freud, who carried his patients from the psychiatrist's couch to the bed. When those unprofessional relations produced children, Reich often forced his wives and mistresses to snuff them out with illegal abortions. In 1940, Reich published his bizarre, pseudoscientific treatise, The Function of the Orgasm, which blamed chastity for illness, poverty, and war. Reich believed that the mystical energy orgone constituted the primary force of life, and that psychic health depends upon orgastic potency. He encouraged people to sit for extended periods of time in wooden boxes he called orgone accumulators. Reich viewed the traditional family as society's endemic illness, which he called familitis. He encouraged all manner of deviancy to destroy the family, just as his ideological heirs do today, through the encouragement of often self-contradictory sexual theories and gender identities, whose absurdity must be perpetually denied and concealed by the straight-faced enforcers of political correctness. Wilhelm Reich may have been nuttier than a fruitcake, but his perverse theories found a large audience and flourished during the free love movement of the 1960s. Orgone accumulator contraptions gained popularity among literary celebrities such as J.D. Salinger, Saul Bellow, and Norman Mailer, and Woody Allen parodied them as the orgasmatron in his 1973 film Sleeper. Reich's ideas continue to impress prominent leftists, whose radicalism perhaps owes to cooking too long in their orgone accumulators. Less charming than the orgasmatron was Reich's fascination with the elucidation and concrete realization of child and adolescent sexuality, a disturbing theme that has enthralled radicals of the far left for decades. But this perverse obsession with child sexuality follows naturally from the cultural communists' premises. If man has no fixed nature, then the human essence derives from human relations, the most influential of which is sex, which must therefore be molded from the earliest stages of life. The socialist senator and sometime presidential candidate Bernie Sanders expressed this once prominent strain of leftist sexual thought in an infamous 1969 op-ed for the radical Vermont Freeman. In Vermont, at a state beach, a mother is reprimanded by authority for allowing her 6-month-old daughter to go about without her diapers on. Now, if children go around naked, they are liable to see each other's sexual organs, and maybe even touch them. Terrible thing. If we bring children up like this, it will probably ruin the whole pornography business, not to mention the large segment of the general economy, which makes its money by playing on people's sexual frustrations. The revolution is coming, and it is a very beautiful revolution. It is beautiful because, in its deepest sense, it is quiet, gentle, and all-pervasive. It knows. Sanders outgrew his perverted sexual rhetoric over time. By 2015, he disavowed the bizarre essays as a dumb attempt at dark satire in an alternative publication. In fact, he eschewed identity politics altogether, campaigning instead on the class conflict that defines classical Marxism. Sanders' career harkens back to the early Marxists of the 19th century, who sought to remake society through political revolution. Despite his dalliances with Reich's orgastic theories, Sanders stands for the class struggle of the old left. But as Bernie campaigned for president in 2016 and 2020, another force arose in the tradition of the 20th century cultural Marxists, who understood that class engendered weaker bonds of solidarity than culture and race. Black Lives Matter, a radical organization that formed in 2013 after the trial of George Zimmerman for the killing of Trayvon Martin, demonstrated the racial focus of the new left. Both shades of red have endured into the 21st century. The socialist senator, some eccentric essays notwithstanding, has been insanely consistent his whole life, as the podcaster Joe Rogan once observed, albeit with insufficient emphasis on the adverb. Sanders' socialism has more in common with old-school labor warriors than with the cultural radicals who supplanted them during the 1960s. Bernie reserved his ire not for straight white males or colonizers, but for the millionaires and billionaires, though he dropped the millionaires from his invective after he became one in 2016. Sanders took issue not with Bill Shakespeare, but with Bill Gates. Bernie's long-standing divergence from modern-day mainstream leftists on immigration highlights the distinction. Though Sanders brought his position more into line with the Democratic Party's pro-immigration policies during his presidential runs, particularly in 2020, the Vermont senator long opposed increased immigration because he felt it would harm American labor. "It does not make a lot of sense to me to bring hundreds of thousands of those workers into this country to work for minimum wage and compete with Americans' kids," he explained in 2013. Patrisse Cullors, co-founder of the Black Lives Matter movement, is delight in destruction. According to Marx, the bulk of mankind was enslaved by economic circumstance. According to described herself and co-founder Alicia Garza as trained Marxists. The organization's third co-founder, Opal Tometi, has been more circumspect in her self-definition, though one may deduce Marxist sympathies from the several photographs of her smiling next to Venezuela's communist dictator, Nicolas Maduro. Cullors, Garza, and Tometi share Sanders' basic Marxist framework, but they didn't name their organization Workers' Lives Matter or Proletarian Lives Matter. While Bernie focuses on wealth to fight a class war, BLM highlights race to wage a culture war. Sanders' war is one of maneuver. He endeavors to change society by winning elections, which is why he spent a decade of his life running unsuccessfully for office before finally winning the mayoralty of Burlington by just 10 votes. He then launched more unsuccessful bids for governor and then Congress before winning a seat in the House of Representatives and later the Senate, at which point he ran 2 unsuccessful campaigns for president. For all his radical rhetoric, Bernie confined his revolution to the traditional political realm. Black Lives Matter has embraced a different strategy, a war of position. Though it behaves much like a political party, Black Lives Matter has not yet run a candidate for office. Instead, it has infiltrated the cultural institutions: Hollywood, corporate America, the mainstream media, technology, higher education, lower education, and various civic associations. In mid-2020, Netflix and Amazon Prime began promoting Black Lives Matter-themed movies on their streaming platforms. Twitter changed its own Twitter bio to #Black Lives Matter, with the later addition of #Black Trans Lives Matter, in case the former declaration did not suffice for the grievance mongers. Goodyear Tires encouraged employees to embrace BLM while banning them from suggesting that all lives matter, that blue lives matter, or that we ought to make America great again. Universities, the incubators of BLM ideology, adorned their student-athletes' uniforms with the motto. Primary and secondary schools adopted it into their curricula with the New York Times' anti-historical 1619 project, which, over the objections of even left-wing academic historians, baselessly recast the American Revolution as a war to preserve slavery. In June of 2020, even the Boy Scouts, once a bastion of traditional American values, announced the creation of a new diversity badge in partnership with Black Lives Matter. To ascend the Boy Scouts' highest ranks, a scout no longer need even be a boy, but he or she does need to recite the credo of self-described Marxists. BLM's cultural Marxist roots help to explain the organization's queer advocacy, despite Black Americans' traditional opposition to aberrant sexual behaviors. In the mid-2000s, just 21 to 25% of Black Americans supported redefining marriage to include same-sex unions, a percentage far lower than among whites and Hispanics, and that difference persists to this day. Nevertheless, despite Black Americans' relatively conservative views of sex, Black Lives Matter declares on its website, We are self-reflexive and do the work required to dismantle cisgender privilege and uplift black trans folk, especially black trans women, who continue to be disproportionately impacted by trans-antagonistic violence. Fortunately, very few black trans women, that is, black men who present themselves as women, are murdered each year, and when the killers are discovered, they usually turn out to be black themselves. So why would an organization ostensibly dedicated to racial issues devote so much energy to sex? Not only does Black Lives Matter foster a queer-affirming network and free itself from the tight grip of heteronormative thinking, it seeks ultimately to disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structure. Wilhelm Reich couldn't have put it better. On closer inspection, Black Lives Matter seems to use race merely as an instrument in the same project undertaken by culturally sensitive radicals all the way back to Antonio Gramsci. Bernie has spent his career encouraging speech, particularly radical speech, as he did in his independent newspaper columns and fringe documentaries. After losing the Democratic presidential nomination in 2016, Bernie debated the merits of socialism with conservative Senator Ted Cruz on CNN. Sanders pursues direct confrontation with other ideas in the public square, confident that his views will prove the more persuasive. The self-proclaimed Marxists of Black Lives Matter have taken the opposite approach, seeking instead to silence any and all who disagree with them. It should come as no surprise, therefore, that Bernie Sanders and Black Lives Matter have locked horns on the campaign trail. On several occasions during the 2016 and 2020 presidential cycles, Black Lives Matter activists stormed the stage at Sanders' campaign events and took his microphone away from him. Alongside similar leftist groups such as Antifa, they have shouted down speakers, demanded firings, and generally stifled speech on university campuses, in corporate boardrooms, and everywhere in between. In their efforts to combat creeping political correctness, conservatives tend to agree with Sanders on the form of battle. The answer to bad speech, they insist, is more speech, following a line of thinking popularized by the liberal philosopher John Stuart Mill and Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis, among others. Whatever else one might say about Sanders, he has respected the traditional American political process, spreading his radical ideas on newspaper pages and the campaign trail. Black Lives Matter and other more culturally minded radicals have taken a different tack. They have pursued their political goals outside of ordinary channels, disrupting campaign speeches and even extorting corporations and public figures. The answer to bad speech, they believe, is censorship. Which strategy has proved more effective? By 2020, after nearly 4 decades in political office without a single legislative achievement to show for it, Bernie Sanders once again lost the Democratic Party nomination for president, that year to Joe Biden, a self-styled moderate who nonetheless adopted many of the mottos and policy goals put forward by Black Lives Matter in his bid to ride the zeitgeist to victory. Sanders' political action accomplished little. The cultural hegemony achieved by Black Lives Matter and its fellow travelers transformed the country. Like Sanders, conservatives have failed. They have failed to conserve our culture from the radicals' designs. They haven't even managed to conserve the ladies' room. More speech has delivered us more bad ideas, chief among them the censorship of traditional speech. The very word censorship sends a chill down the spines of most Americans. And yet, however distasteful it seems, the tactic appears to work. No two people could disagree more on the subject of socialism than Ted Cruz and Bernie Sanders. But these seeming opposites have more in common than perhaps either of them would admit. They each respect the standards that set the boundaries of our political system. Both men may wish to change that system according to their political lights, but they undertake that task while respecting the established rules. Black Lives Matter and like-minded cultural revolutionaries do not respect the rules. They recognize that established standards of speech and behavior will always impede their plans. Indeed, the thwarting of such radicalism is the standard's very purpose. Contrary to conservatives' usual talking points, these radicals understand free speech far better than its supposed defenders. From the 1920s through the 1970s, the radical rantings of the revolutionaries met derision and dismissal. The country was not yet ready for the orgasmatron. By the second and third decades of the 21st century, however, those ideas had entered the mainstream. Eventually, the radicals achieved cultural hegemony. Having realized much of Gramsci's, Reich's, and the Frankfurt School's visions, today's revolutionaries have only to enforce their new orthodoxy through a ruthless system of censorship, and thereby usher in our brave new world.
And that was Chapter 3 of Speechless by Michael Knowles. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, a little bit of Donald Trump.
Like those heroes who crossed the Delaware, conquered the Rockies, stormed the beaches, won the battles, and tamed the unknown frontiers, we will persist and we will prevail. With your help, we will take back the House. We will win the Senate. And then a Republican president will make a triumphant return to the White House. And I wonder who that will be. But who knows? Who knows? I may even decide to beat them for a third time. I stand before you today to declare that the incredible journey we've begun together, it is far from being over. Our movement of proud, hard-working American patriots is just getting started, and in the end, we will win. We will win. So no matter how much the Washington establishment and the powerful special interests may want to silence us, let there be no doubt we will be victorious and America will be stronger and greater than ever before. And I want you to know that I'm going to continue to fight right by your side. We will do what we've done right from the beginning, which is to win.
And that was Donald Trump. Back in a minute. Thank you. The following is one of my voiceover demos. If you're a voiceover artist and you would like to advertise one of your demos on my podcast, please send an MP3 to thedrill12, all one word, at gmail.com. That's thedrill12 at gmail.com. Back in a minute. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Caesar's Palace for 12 rounds of boxing. In the red corner, from Los Angeles, California, wearing the red trunks with the gold trim, weighing in at 125 pounds, the lightweight champion of the world, Danny Little Red Lopez. Well, Bill, our winners get a home theater receiver. That's right. Experience the full potential of high-definition video with this 72-channel digital home theater receiver from Yamaha. But wait, that's not all. They also get a 5.1-channel surround sound system from Mirage. With 5 palm-sized speakers and a compact subwoofer cube, the MX 5.1 brings you huge immersive sound with Mirage's omnipolar technology. All from the Spiegel catalog, Chicago, Illinois, 60609. And they're taking closer order as down the stretch they come. Mr. Hot Stuff has 3 lengths to make up with chocolate candy last. On the rail, take the points behind that gallant son with chocolate candy gaining on the outside. In the lead is Pioneer of the Nile being tackled by chocolate candy. They're neck and neck as they come to the wire. and Pioneer of the Nile holds off Chocolate Candy and wins the Santa Anita Derby. And now, on your feet, time to greet holder of 14 NBA titles, your home team, your Los Angeles Lakers. Number 3 at 6'8", fifth year out of UCLA, playing forward, Trevor Ariza. Starting at center, number 17 at 7 feet, fourth year out of St. Andrews High School, Andrew Bynum. And at guard, number 24, 6'6", 13th season out of Loyal Marion High School, Kobe Bryant. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there and reminding you that you are not neutral and that the government has no rights.